And just personal note, Larry and I met at a Rotary Club meeting in Arlington back when I was pastoring over there. And it was an interesting meeting because we did not know each other at all at that time. And I don't think either one of us had a clue that we would become the friends that we have become, that we would share in our lives to the degree that we have shared. Not only individually between us, but with our families. And so I'm blessed to have Larry here.
So it's really a delight to be here, to be back in church with David.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, good. Sorry. I'm a little intimidated. You know, I asked Dave, I said, is this like the second Sunday of Ordinary Time or something? He says, no, it's Pentecost. Pentecost. Wow. I'm going to talk a little bit about Pentecost because it comes out of the book, but I'm going to talk about transformation and translation and trust. So I wrote a book called The Way, and it's an interspiritual journey. That means I went looking for truth with a capital T, and I found some of it in Christianity, and I found some of it in some other places. Just like the reading we had from the Lakota word, you know, it resonates. There's something there that you can recognize. Around 15 or 20 years ago, you know, I went through sort of a midlife thing. I mean, is this what I'm supposed to do with my life? You know, and I became interested, actually at 9/11, I became interested in Islam, just for political reasons, not religious reasons. I didn't know anything about it. And I came to learn about it. I thought, well, this is kind of an intriguing religion. I know more about it than I used to, but you know, even though I go to church every week and I've been doing that for 50 years, I really don't know that much about my religion. I don't know that much about my beliefs or where they come from. And my initial thought was, well, I'll just confirm everything that I was told. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. There's 2 billion believers. There's 2,000 years of history. There's a book for crying out loud. You know, I mean, what could go wrong? And, you know, there's a lot of things that I discovered, you know, that a lot of what has become Christianity started out in Zoroastrianism or Judaism, that there's mythologies that other cultures treat as mythologies, and some people in Christianity treat as histories. You know, there's things like global floods and virgin births and physical resurrections that an anthropologist might say, yeah, those are common symbols in a bunch of different cultures. I discovered that the Bible really didn't speak in one voice. It's not supposed to. It was written by different people in different times. They had different theologies. I discovered that a lot of things that I just took for granted, I assumed they were set in stone. I'm talking about original sin, the Trinity, substitutionary atonement, doctrines that developed hundreds of years after Jesus' death. So I say that not to say, well, just don't pay any attention to that, Christianity. It's just to say, I was somebody that thought it would confirm, and instead I thought, well, there's still value here, but it's a little shakier than I thought it was. And I'm in a good place now. I can talk about it very casually, but I want to tell you that when I first got to that point, it was not comfortable. I was really, I was angry, you know, that people had told me things that they believed as if they were fact, and they weren't facts. And, you know, that the church had taken some positions that I didn't agree with morally, but I went along with it as a church, and I think, well, I wasn't so sure that that was the thing to do. So it was a really wrenching thing. But today, I style myself as a follower of Jesus because in all that, I mean, no matter if I believe in talking snakes or original sin, I went looking for truth with a capital T, and I found it in the person of Jesus. And I was particularly moved by, I come from a Catholic background, and I spent some time in Protestantism, and a lot of my Catholic friends say, well, you know, you're supposed to go to Mass every Sunday, you're supposed to go to confession, particularly after you kill somebody. And that just didn't seem like the right path. It didn't seem like truth with a capital T. And some of my Protestant friends said, we have to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And I said, well, I don't really know what that means. And I think that's maybe not enough of a commitment for me. So Jesus was actually asked one time, it appears in 2 Gospels, what am I supposed to do? He said, well, be a good person. Sounds kind of Catholic. He said, to follow the law. Sounds kind of Jewish. He was Jewish. And the guy pressed him, the rich young man. He said, okay, sell your stuff and follow me. And so my wife and I, this is our journey, not just my journey, 52 years old, said, we're blessed. We have some financial security, we have a 40-year marriage, we have adult kids that are launched, my parents are still alive. We're just blessed. And we've been doing a lot of receiving and not enough giving. So at 52, we quit our jobs, we sold our house, and we spent our lives in service. And it was really eye-opening because, I had lived in this cocoon where I had the same neighbors and I went to the same schools and the same stores and the same churches. And all of a sudden, I'm out doing taxes for low-income people, or driving veterans to the VA, or teaching school in Africa. And all of a sudden, I realized you had a very privileged worldview. You thought that you succeeded because you made good choices and other people made bad choices. And that's not the case. Bad outcomes are largely the result of bad circumstances and bad luck. And so I tell my wealthy friends, there's more luck involved in being successful than you want to admit. And I tell my poor friends, there's more hard work involved in being successful than you want to admit. But it just made me realize, as somebody else expressed it, everyone else is just me living the same life from a different place. And that image really stayed with me. So one of the really momentous experiences we had, we were in Africa teaching school, and Jill got a bug bite. And we don't know what kind of bug it was, and we don't know when or where it happened. But within 24 hours, her arm looked like a leg. And you think, well, just go to a doctor box, get a shot, you'll be fine. Well, it's not that easy. And so, we're driving around rural Africa trying to find a medical doctor, and we're going to hospitals that don't have any doctors, or hospitals that have doctors that don't have any sterilization equipment. It's like, this person could die from a mosquito bite. And so, we ended up in the best hospital in the country. And again, that's my privilege. There's a lot of places we went where there were people standing in line waiting 3 days for the doctor, and I was able to jump in the car and find a doctor, and it was life and death, and I don't regret doing it, but I worry about the people that couldn't jump in the car and get the doctor. So she's better, and it had really frightened me, so I had a conversation with our guide, 30-year-old African man, very compassionate, very wise, a teacher to me, and I said, listen, it was kind of like the Warren Zevon song, send lawyers, guns, and money. This is not happening to me again. And I just told the guy, I just freaked out. I said, if somebody almost died here, it can't happen again. I got to make sure I do whatever I can do to control the situation. And because I have always been in a situation where I could work my way out, I could think my way out, I could talk my way out, I could pay my way out. I've never been in a situation where nothing works. There's nobody to talk to. There's no rules to follow. There's no check to write. You're just either going to get well or you're not. And so this young man looked at me, and he had a loving look in his eye, and he said, help me understand your problem. He said, your wife is shot full of antibiotics. She's now the most healthy person you've known. Your friends have rallied around you. My credit cards didn't work. That was more of the anxiety. But we had people that we met for 2 weeks that said, here's $100, here's another $100. So the guy said, you have $400 in your pocket. You might be the only guy in the capital city that has $400 US in his pocket. And we're going back to Jumbo where your food's taken care of, your housing's taken care of, your transportation's taken care of. So just help you understand your problem. I felt about this small. And I said, I don't know what that crazy guy was talking about. I really don't have a problem. I'm embarrassed I can brought it up. And you know, the question I asked myself was, why did you have so little faith? And I don't use faith in a term of belief, because I'm not a believer in belief. But I use faith in terms of trust. Why didn't you trust fate, or God, or karma, or the universe, or the people around you, or the resources that you and your wife had emotionally to get through? You got through. Why did you have so little faith? And it was a real life lesson. So there were really, now I'm in the middle of the book, and you know, it's a guy that basically grew up 50 years thinking one thing, and now all of a sudden at age 52 he says, no, I'm not sure that was the right thing. You know, there's a lot of things I used to believe that maybe don't make so much sense to me. So there were three things that kind of steered me, and they all steered me in the same direction. One was the mystics. The mystics are people of all traditions. And Christianity is not a particularly mystical tradition, but there are Christian mystics. And those are people who go looking for direct encounters with ultimate reality or God. And I was just really compelled that there is a textbook experience that a lot of people in a lot of places, a lot of different times have experienced. It's an impersonal experience. People meet God don't meet a person, generally. They feel a sense of oneness. They feel like, well, it's not that God's up there and I'm down here. It's like, God's here, God's here, God's here, God's here, God's everywhere. Somebody said, God is the space within the molecules. And there are people that have experiences where the sense of oneness is so great, they look at their hand and they don't really know where their hand ends and where the rest of the universe begins. And so it's a really profound experience that basically convinces you, shoot, everybody's related and everything's connected. And you know, it's in my old Catholic days, I thought, well, if I meet God, I'll meet three of them. I'll probably go to heaven. The popes will be on one side, the saints will be on the other side, and there's grandma. And I don't think that way anymore. The second thing was the Eastern religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, because they're also impersonal. They're concerned with the here and now. You know, you hear people say, be here now. And it's experiential, not doctrinal or doctrinal. And when I say impersonal, in the West, we always think about persons. We think, I'm a person, God is a person, or three persons. I have a personal relationship. My politics, I have personal responsibility. My religion, I have personal salvation. It's all about the person. In the East, it's like, person, what's that? I mean, isn't your person something that changes all the time? Isn't yourself really made up of your chemistry and your conditioning and your experiences and the result of things that you and other people have done in the past that push you where you are today? Are you really sure you have a self? Are you really sure you have a soul? Are you really sure you have free will? And those are really challenging notions, you know, if you've grown up thinking about personhood. But for me, we have a Zen practice now. Interestingly, my Zen teacher was a Catholic priest. He's a Filipino man who studied in Japan in the 70s. And all the Jesuit priests in Japan in the 70s studied Zen. And many of them left the priesthood. He left the priesthood. He's now married. He's still Catholic. They became Zen masters. And so in Zen, we have something called Kensho, which is getting a glimpse of your true self, which in Buddhism is no self. And the realization you're looking for is to realize that everyone's related and everything's connected. So I thought, well, now I've heard that before. That's the same thing that the mystics taught me. And then finally, you know, if you decide, I'm going to learn everything I can about the last 2,000 or 4,000 years of religion, well, you end up in a lot of places. You know, you end up in philosophy and theology and history and archaeology and the physical sciences. And about 100 years ago, people like Einstein developed something called quantum mechanics. The new physics is very different than the old physics. In the old physics, everything is separate. It's See, if you're tuned to the mystics or you're tuned to Eastern religions, you think, well, there's something wrong with that. Everything's separate. We're like billiard balls bouncing into each other. In the new physics, well, no, there's an apparent separation, but there's an underlying oneness. And really, there's a field. There's a series of fields. And there's weirdness out there. You know, the table is not as solid as we think it is. The air is not as empty as we think it is. Space and time are constructs, and they're really one construct, space-time. Light is both a particle and a wave. Energy and matter are not two different things, they're two sides of one thing. And so you keep coming back to this idea that everyone's related and everything's connected. Now, I have to confess to you that, you know, sometimes I talk about my book and somebody says, well, geez, George, I mean, you know, you spent 20 years, you read 1,000 books, you baked in a sweat lodge, you chanted the Shiva, you rolled with the dervishes. Is that all you came up with? And I said, yes. I'm proud to say that my learning experience was mostly an unlearning experience. And I think I realized the one thing that I know, and really the only thing I need to know, because it changes your life if you realize, based on my experience, based on the Eastern religions, the mystics, and the scientists, everyone's related, everyone's connected. You live your life differently. You don't see the other person as an other. You don't feel like their pain is something disconnected from you. So it was transformative. And to the extent that my adult children said, man, what happened to you? And I was like, what? I said, you know what? You know, he used to be this really conservative, type A, Catholic, Republican, this really rigid guy, and now you're warm and fuzzy, and you cry more, and you laugh more, and you have more friends and deeper friendships. Whatever you're doing, more people need to do it. I said, well, I couldn't tell you a sentence. I read 1,000 books. I baked in a sweat lodge. I promise it was a throwaway comment. I said, I have to write a book. And he said, well, you need to write that book. I said, I can't write a book. I haven't taken a single note. I've never written a book, and I had no plans to write a book when I started this. But they were insistent, and I came to feel a sense of mission about it. And I really felt like, yeah, you know, I was in a bunch of places where other people weren't. I experienced a bunch of things that other people didn't. I had realizations that other people didn't have. So I'm supposed to write a book. And it got to the point where I had this fear. I mean, I'm 67. I'm in pretty good shape, but you never know. And, you know, I had this fear that I might not get the book done. So my wife was with me the whole time. It was our journey. She was my editor and critic. She said, and there will be a point where I can finish the book. And that would have given me a tremendous sense of relief. So one day, she doesn't like me to tell the story this way. And it's a slight exaggeration. But she says, even the only time you want, I've got the book under control. And it was a relief to me because I really wanted the book to get out there. The book is it's really gentle. It's not prescriptive. Some people look at the title and say the way, and I don't really want to be told, you know, the way. I said, no, this is the broad way. This is the truth with a capital T that you find in a lot of traditions. If you read philosophers like Spinoza, that makes sense. If you read scientists like Einstein, that makes sense. If you read Lao Tzu or Buddha, that makes sense. And if you read Jesus, that makes sense. And so, it's a book that I'm just really behind. I'm really, like I said, I'm missional about it. And you know, I mean, what I learned in the thing was to be open. You know, to be open-hearted and open-minded. And in Buddhism, they say, don't cling. There's a Zen patriarch that said, you don't have to go looking for truth. It's right in front of you. Just let go of your opinions. You know, there's just so many times that we don't go places because that's just not where we're used to going. And you know, I've never heard anybody say, now that I understand how everyone else thinks about the world, I'm even more convinced that the one way I've always thought about the world is the one and only way to think about the world. I've never heard anyone say that. I've always heard people that are open-hearted and open-minded, that grow, that make connection, that see the value in other people and other thoughts. And there's one other thing. I just read yesterday, Catholic priest, Father Greg Boyle, you cannot be curious and judgmental at the same time. And think about that. Think about that. And that's in these days when there's so much division and so many people that want to choose up, why don't you just ask questions? You know, I have breakfast with a bunch of guys and I don't agree with on a bunch of things. Somebody will say something that sounds absurd to me, but I'll say, why do you say that? And sometimes there's a really good reason that I didn't particularly appreciate. Or, well, what's the other side of that argument? He said, well, I really haven't thought about it. He said, well, I can think about it. You know, so maybe there's something he did not think about or appreciate. And so the questioning has been a thing. So Pentecost, you know, we read these stories and we think, well, I mean, does that stuff still happen? Do people still have Damascus Road experiences? Do they still have tongues of fire? Does spirituality transform them? Yeah, it does. It does. And there might be people that sort of hear about me and say, I don't know, it sounds like that guy might be really angry and cynical and nihilistic. He might have really succumbed to all these secular pressures. You know, I hope you realize that I'm not that way. I'm in the best place I've ever been in my life. And it came from asking questions and sort of running the gauntlet. Translation. You know, when I was a child, I heard this story. I thought, how can everybody hear things? There's all these different languages being spoken. They all hear the same language. And it resonates with me because in my discovery, you know, religions are like languages. We're all trying to describe the indescribable in the terms that are natural to us. And so to me, you know, like somebody says, well, I'm really persuaded by the I am statements in the Bible. I am too, but are you persuaded by the I am statements in the Upanishads, in the Hindu tradition? Well, you know, the flood narrative in the Old Testament is really compelling. It was pretty compelling when it first showed up in the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm really taken with the parable of the prodigal son. Do you mean the Christian parable, or do you mean the Buddhist parable that appeared first? So when you study the other traditions, you kind of realize, hey, these folks, they're largely saying some of the same things that we're saying. So it's just been an incredible journey. It's something I feel missional about sharing. You don't have to agree with me about anything. I'm not trying to convince you to embrace anything or reject anything. I'm just saying, you know, there's a lot of really interesting questions out there. The most important ones don't have answers, but, you know, it's still worthwhile to ask them and to get other people's input and to really reflect about, you know, whether I'm living the life I'm supposed to live. So thanks so much for being with me today, and I'll hang around if anybody has any questions or comments. Or occasionally people tell me I'm going to hell, or they give me a Bible, and, you know, so that doesn't offend me either. I'm used to it.